All right, everybody, welcome to Regular Expressions Regex Overview. My name is Matt Shear. I got my Twitter information on there. You don't have to worry about getting your phones up. This will be published on SlideShare. That will go live at 11:30. It's got that scheduled, ready to go. And so this talk is going to be fast-paced. I've got a lot of information and very little time to go over it, but we'll try to move along and just to let everyone know, this particular talk assumes no prior experience with Regex, so we're starting from the beginning. I myself am not an authority on this subject, but I do need to do this at work occasionally, and a lot of people have told me that they really struggle with it. So, with that being said, I can't make everybody in this room a Reg expert in 20-some minutes, but we'll do our best to at least get you started and set you on a path towards self-learning. And so let's take it away. So, again, introduce myself. I'm a system security engineer working in the financial services industry. I also run the SIMPA security SIG meetings in Cincinnati area. Hit me up if you're in that area and want to start attending. We meet monthly, the third Thursday of each month. I was actually in this very room speaking 2 years ago at Unity, and it's an honor and privilege to be back to speak in front of everyone again. So we'll move on. First thing I want to do is talk about what regular expressions are not. So the term regular expressions are often simply called regex for short, should not be confused with old sayings. When it comes to old sayings, you would be hard-pressed to beat the recollection and retelling of old sayings than my own mother. And heading into Derbycon, I assumed I would be probably the only person in the history of Derbycon ever with a mom slide deck till I saw the keynote. This will be a little less heart-wrenching, so you can certainly expect a healthy dose of motherly advice as we go along. So regex is a common syntax used to match patterns when parsing text data or output. Regex capture groups are used to extract strings of specific data into reference points for retrieval or processing. So why should we learn regex? Regex is a great skill set to have in the back pocket of nearly any interdisciplinary role across the information technology landscape. There's a lot of uses such as application and software development, database querying, a lot of Linux powerful commands, such as grep, awk, sed, find, so on. And also it's great for searching through any type of text data or system logs. So, why talk about it at Derbycon and an information security conference? It does have its applications in InfoSec. Here's just some of them, but it can be used for content filtering systems, certainly input validation, and things like web forms, things like that. Your next generation firewall, unified threat management, layer 7 definitions are almost always going to be pattern matching using regex. Parsing large volumes of data or system logs, pick out specific data points of interest. Security incident event management systems for building, refining searches, or finding specific log events or log items in subdata, and simply understanding the underpinnings of many security products and utilities. So, as my mom would say, when I was often a kid growing up and I wanted to do something and the answer was usually no, she would say, hey, if all of your friends were jumping off a cliff, would you follow them? Well, now this was years before bungee jumping, so nowadays, if the safety is there, I might go ahead and do that. Sorry, Mom. So, the different flavors of regex. The most important thing to note here is that one size does not fit all with regex. So there are conventions and standards that sort of traverse the whole offering, but there are going to be specific nuances and little gotchas depending which flavor of regex, which particular engine you're using, and I list some of the common ones there, and there's probably a bunch of others. So, some good resources. Online learning site, regex1.com is fantastic. I cannot recommend that site enough to go through. It's free. There is no sign up needed. You basically just start working through exercises. It will help get you up to speed very quickly. Regex test site that I use often is regexer.com. There's also, I think, regex101.com. Pretty good. That's just my personal favorite. There's some good information on some of these other sites. And if you really get bored, for our purposes today, we're sort of lumping everything under the generic term regex, but you can find out the very specific nuances between regular expressions, regex, regexp, if you want to check out the Wikipedia article. It's not a short read, but it's very informative. So, let's begin. Something my mom would tell me is, this is going to hurt me a lot more than it hurts you. Well, she would tell me this when I was in trouble, getting ready to be disciplined, so I'm the one that moments later is going to be crying with tears in my eyes and a sore bottom. My mom's holding the yardstick in her hand. I'm not sure how true this statement really was. So, regex basics. At the most simplest level, you can simply type in exactly what you're trying to match when you're looking at a set of data. The important thing to note here is that text string pattern matching is case sensitive. So you can drive yourself crazy by missing something that's uppercase or lowercase. So just a word of, sort of a cautionary note there. And then certain alphanumeric characters may require an escape character or prefix rather to match, which is going to be the backslash. And we'll touch on that more here in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off talking about matching single characters. I'm going to get into quantifiers and how you start matching multiple things here in a moment. But the /w, lowercase w, we're going to start off lowercase here. That's going to match a single alphanumeric character, and also underscore symbols. This will only match low ASCII characters, so no accented or non-Roman characters. So just be cautious of that when you're using that. If there's a little accent symbol, it may not pick it up. You may have to specify that specifically. So, number matching would be a /lowercase d. That's going to match any single digit character. That's a 0 through a 9. And matching a space, we're going to use a /lowercase s. And so that's going to match any white space character, spaces, tabs, line breaks, so on. So, we talked about case sensitivity. That absolutely applies to the character classes. And it's crucial to get those right, because if you put those in uppercase, it matches the opposite. So, /W, capital D, capital S translate to not a word character, not a digit, or not white space. So it's important to make those distinctions when you're trying to match patterns. Now we're going to talk about quantifiers. Everything we've talked about up to this point has been matching a single character. The quantifiers are what allow you to match a sort of a row or string or repeating pattern of characters. They call them quantifiers. I tend to think of them as wildcards, just to keep it simple in my own head. So let's talk about these. The dot will match any single character. The plus suffix will match one or more repetitions of a character. So note the important difference of when we go to the asterisk or the star, suffix matches 0 or more repetitions. So plus, there has to be at least one there. Star, it's sort of optional if it's there or not. It'll account for it if it is. Question mark means that the character is optional, and that's trailing the pattern, the character you're putting in your pattern. The pipe symbol sort of works as an or separator between characters. The caret, or sometimes called the hat symbol, is a not specifier to exclude a character, and that's going to be enclosed in square brackets, and it prefixes the pattern. And I kind of give an example here at the bottom of what that looks like. So what about when you need to actually match an escape character that's in the pattern that you want to collect? So gesundheit. So in that case, if I want to capture a dot, plus, asterisk, question mark, pipe, caret symbol, whatever have you, I have to prefix it with a backslash. And so then the question becomes, well, if I need to match a backslash in my pattern, what do I do? You're going to use 2 backslashes. You're going to escape character and then your backslash. And if you haven't worked with regex, you may look sometimes at certain Windows utilities and you wonder why there are 4 backslashes before I start a fully qualified domain. Now you know, because the back-end engine is more than likely regex, and so this is accounting for the 2 backslashes escaped out. So let's talk about ranges. So in addition to quantifiers, ranges may be specified with pattern matching. characters are enclosed inside of square brackets and separated by a hyphen. And I give some examples. So we talked about case sensitivity. Lowercase a-z will match any character A through Z, but you could obviously tighten that in and do E through L if you wanted. You can also do the same thing with capital letter characters and digits. It's good for all of those. So there are other options for repetitions. So in addition to a range quantifier, repetitions may be specified with for pattern matching. So the number of character occurrences are specified inside of curly braces, or brackets sometimes they're called, and separated by a comma. And I give some examples here where A and inside the curly brackets we've got 4 will match 4 capital letter A's. If you're looking for IPv4 addresses and looking to collect that information, that could be extremely helpful. 1, 4 will match either 1, 2, 3, or 4 iterations, and 4, will basically match 4 or as many as there are. So line matching, if you have something where you want to capture data where the line specifically starts a certain way or ends a certain way, you have the caret symbol to match the beginning of a line, the $sign to match the end of a line. You can use those independently, or you can combine them together if you're looking for occurrences of a specific line by basically putting the caret at the beginning, have your pattern, and then the $sign at the end. So that's a good way to match an entire line if you're just depends what you're collecting. So the true power of regex is fully realized with defined capture groups. These essentially define array-like variables to pattern-matched data. This is how we return the precise data we want while ignoring the content we do not care about. Capture groups are defined by patterns enclosed inside of a parentheses. And then you can also nest really as many of these as you want. So regex subcapture groups can be defined by using nested parentheses. And I give an example here of the word pattern match. And you can see how I've got that set up. The first capture group will be literally the words pattern matched together. The second capture group is only going to capture the word match. But you can put as many of those together as you want. It can get a little confusing sometimes when you start getting 3 or more of these. It gets a little tricky, but it can absolutely be done. You just have to be mindful of where your parentheses are at. So some things that my mom would say, learn to crawl before you walk. Learning regex for the first time can be a little tricky. When you're really struggling with this stuff, just start over. Sometimes obliterate your pattern. Just begin again. My mom would often tell me it's a cinch by the inch, but hard by the yard. And then finally she would tell me measure twice and cut once. So it's very important sometimes when you've got a pattern and it looks like it's right, actually go through your data and verify that you're not missing something, because invariably what you end up with are these little one-off lines where there's this unexpected character that appears maybe a couple lines out of thousands of lines of something you're trying to get captured. That's sort of where it gets a little tricky. And then if you really get stuck and you're thinking this just isn't going well at all, my mom would always tell me, hey, there are starving children in insert third world deprived nation here that would love to have those vegetables. When I was a kid, I didn't want to eat my broccoli. Now I love this stuff. Back then, that just wasn't the case. I have a friend, Jan, from Ukraine. He suggested that Kazakhstan would be a good country to insert here. So clearly the movie Borat is in his digital movie collection. Nice. So let's actually look at some examples here. So the first example I've selected, for all of these, we're going to look at threat feeds because we're at Derbycon. What else would we want to look at? So we're going to look at a DNS black hole file list in boot format, which is generally for Windows DNS. So our objective here is to capture a list of fully qualified domain names. And so here is what our data looks like. We've got the word primary, a space, and then the actual fully qualified domain name we want to capture, and then block domain hosts. There could be other definitions there at the end. Doesn't really matter. what's nice about this is you can see that it's nice and spaced out for us. So that's going to make our pattern pretty simple. So what we do is we have the word primary in here, and again, case sensitivity, it's in capital letters, \S to account for the space there. And then we simply just match everything until there's another space, and we put that in our capture group. So the \S will keep going until there is a space. The plus just specify, because otherwise it would just be one character at a time. And then for our capture group data, you can see what that looks like. And just go back real quick again. You can see primary space, the data we want, and then another space and the other information. We're going to look at another example here that's on malware domains. It's very similar, except the file is in bind format. So we're going to look at spyware domains, which is a little bit different definition, but our objective is completely the same. This doesn't look a whole lot different than what we just looked at. The difference is there are double quotation marks around the information we want. It's a very simple modification to our regex pattern. We simply specify zone, we account for the S. We've got our double quotes accounted for. Other than surrounding our capture group inside the double quotes, it's pretty much exactly the same, and the capture group data reflects exactly what we wanted. So that's where we wanted to be. Now let's look at IP addresses. So for threat feed data, we're going to look at DNS black hole and the IP blacklist. You can see references to all the URLs here, but our objective is to get a list of IPs. Other than some commented out code at the top, this is very simple. It's giving us our numbers. Now, you could do a precision match like at the title slide deck that you saw at the bottom, and that's an IPv4 address, properly formatted. If you know your data source, and particularly as you're learning, I recommend starting something a little easier to digest. Again, this is sort of crawl before you walk, walk before you run. So what we can simply do inside our capture group is specify digit with 1 to 3 iterations. We're accounting for our dot with the \dot. We're really repeating that until the end and putting it all inside of our capture group. And there's the IP addresses we want. And as you noted, it probably noticed it ignores obviously all the commented out characters. So that gives us exactly what we want in this example. So the next example I want to look at is spamcop. Now, unfortunately, as great as our service is, they don't make this available in a nice format we can just download. But what you can do is run wget and pull it down, and you get literally the exact HTML source from the page itself, and that's going to contain those IP addresses. It gets a little tricky because we get a lot of noise information we don't want. Again, all we care about is the IP address. And this would be useful if we were wanting to put this into our firewall or something along those lines. And you'll notice that outside of the HTML tags, we could really go about this two ways. We could either account for the href tag after the equal sign. I prefer to do it between the HTML tags, the greater than, less than symbols. There's really no wrong answer here. That's just the way I decided to go with it. So really it's the exact same example we had, other than we've got our greater than and less than symbols at the beginning and end, respectively, to get exactly what we want. So our final example we're going to look at here is a malware domain list. So complete database in CSV format. Everything we looked at when it comes to wanting to capture fully qualified domain names has been pretty simple because it's been nice and spaced out for us. With CSV, you don't have that luxury. So here's where it gets a little trickier. And this isn't too hard to understand, but it will give you an idea how quickly your pattern will start to grow based on the complexity of what you're trying to do on your data set. And so you can see an example here. We've got a date stamp. I looked through all the data. Fortunately, the format for the timestamp is consistent. They're putting in leading zeros where there are, for example, 3 becomes 03, not the number 3. That can become a real headache if you don't have those leading zeros. It's not impossible, but it does make it trickier to get the pattern matched the way you want. in this particular example, I'm also going to take advantage of the fact that we know domain name registrations have to start with an alphanumeric. Domain names can have, when you want to register them, they can have a hyphen in them that they can't begin or end with it. So I'm going to take advantage of that here when I'm matching this pattern. So you can see where I'm matching the timestamp at the very beginning. Inside the CSV, they're putting each field inside of double quotes, so I'm accounting for those. And then at the beginning here, the /W, again, it's got to be an alphanumeric character for the domain that's registered that I want to find. And then inside the curly brackets, because the domain, I want to capture the fully qualified domain, so you're going to have dots in there. And also a hyphen is an allowed character. There's no guarantee that the domain is going to have a hyphen. And then there's also going to be other characters. So what I've done inside the square brackets, you can see, is we've got or separators. That's the pipe symbol. And then the plus sign will basically match anything after that. And I don't know if it's reflected here. Yeah, here's near the bottom. There's a no domain name here. In the data set, they put a hyphen there. So our pattern, since it has to start with a alphanumeric, it won't cause us problems. And then that's in our capture group. And from all this complex data, a bunch of stuff we don't want, we're getting exactly the oops, this is, I apologize, this is not the right capture group example. So I'll have to edit the slide deck, but it does actually capture exactly what we wanted with the fully qualified domain names. Apologize, there's a little error on this slide. So, we talked about learning regex. The most important thing is you've got to work with this stuff. It's use it or lose it. Some things my mom would tell me, she would often preface things saying, if I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, which mathematically I never really completely understood, because technically, if you told me once, you told me one time, not 1,000. But while we're pondering that, she would also say, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Actions speak louder than words. That's getting in and doing this stuff, and practice makes perfect. What I would recommend doing is go to regex1.com. Do that. Do their examples at least once a month for the first 3 months. Set a calendar reminder. Go through it every 3 months after that, so you're looking at every quarter, just to keep that saw sharpened. So when you're looking at stuff, you're not struggling thinking, boy, how did I do this again? How do I need to do this? Keep it fresh in your mind. Otherwise, you'll just lose it. At least I do. So, just a cheap plug here. A couple places I'll be at after this. I'll be at Northern Kentucky University's Cybersecurity Symposium speaking on October 13th. If you're in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area, come check that out. Also, the SIMPA main night, I'll be at the Hackers Night meeting talking about active defense. I probably don't have a lot of time for questions with the amount of material, but is there a quick question from, yes?
At the beginning, you mentioned that certain platforms work kind of differently for regex. Do you have any resources that have like a cheat sheet for common platforms on like their quirks and unique things, like the fact that like BSD grep doesn't use the \d, but Linux does?
Yeah, those are those little gotchas. I don't have a specific resource that identifies each and every one of those. Sometimes for specific systems, for example, I work in SIM a lot, and that has it uses PCRE as its engine, which is the sort of the Perl version. They actually have, for that particular product, a cheat sheet that has some good examples in it. So sometimes if you're looking at something vendor-specific, you can find a good cheat sheet for them. Other than that, I wish I had a better resource other than just sort of Googling for it. All right, well, if there's anything else, then I just want to thank everybody for coming out to see my talk here at Derbycon, and hopefully I'll see everybody at the Marriott next year.